Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will begin a 5-day visit on Tuesday to Indonesia and Singapore, two of India's strategically key partners in the region, with an aim to deepen defence ties, particularly in the Indo Pacific region. Announcing the visit, the Ministry of External Affairs said a raft of agreements, including in areas of defence and security, are expected to be inked during Modi's visit to these two countries, which are members of the powerful regional grouping ASEAN. India and Indonesia are likely to sign a pact on defence cooperation, as a similar agreement inked years ago had expired. In Singapore, Modi will hold bilateral talks with his Singaporean counterpart and deliver the keynote address at the Shangri-La dialogue, which is expected to be attended by top leaders from several important countries. On this edition of India's World, we will take stock of the Prime Minister's visit to Indonesia and Singapore. Joining me on the program today are TCA Raghavan, former diplomat, Srikanth Kondapalli, Professor, Centre for East Asian Studies, JNU, and ST Muni, Foreign Affairs expert. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Professor Muni, I'd like to begin with you. What can we expect from Prime Minister Modi's visit to Indonesia and Singapore? What do you believe is going to be on the table?
I think you said rightly that the Indo Pacific is the main focus of this visit. And in both the countries, this focus would emerge very strongly. In Indonesia, we are even having a special economic zone that's at Sarabai port, which is a part of Sumatra, which is so close to Andaman and Nicobar. And I may underline here that Indonesia has laid a very specific emphasis on the concept of Indo-Pacific. They are doing it since 2013, but under the President Jokowi, they have further refined this concept, and now they are laying greater emphasis on the ASEAN centrality, and Indonesians thinking that they are actually the fulcrum of the global maritime scene, or they are the axis of the Indo-Pacific, because they consider themselves at the center of it. And in that respect, they are somewhat unhappy that the Quad has not invited them. Quad is a discussion forum. If it is a military alliance, they would not like to go in there. I am sure India would not like to go in there. And they have now chosen that they should build up a cooperation with India. And this is what the most welcome aspect of it is. In Singapore, the Prime Minister will deliver Shangri-La lecture, and I think he will draw an outline and a definition of India's future role in the region as to what it is going to do. Because in Shangri-La dialogue, almost all relevant actors and stakeholders would be present. And I think that's a wonderful forum where the Prime Minister is going there for the first time, Indian Prime Minister is going for the first time, to define how India looks at the region and what we can contribute to the stability and peace of the region. So I find that both the visits, besides the bilaterals, bilaterals are more important in the case of Indonesia rather than in case of Singapore, because Singapore we have a very stable relationship, including in the defense matters. But in Indonesia we still to begin. We began in 2013. But brick by brick, we are building it up, and I think this would be a major. This is for the first time that Prime Minister Modi, who otherwise travels very extensively, is going to Indonesia. And after 2 years of the Indonesian president coming to us on a formal visit in 2016, of course, he came on 2018, but that was more a ceremonial one. So I look forward to India's projection of its own priorities and how it looks at the dynamics of the Indo-Pacific.
Indeed. Professor Kondapalli, let's focus a little bit on Indonesia now. What are India's priorities as far as Indonesia is concerned?
Obviously, as a maritime neighbor with which India had resolved the maritime dispute in the 1970s, there is much that India could do in the maritime domain, given the number of thousands of islands that Indonesia is composed of, and the issues of maritime economy, maritime ecology, and so on and so forth. This is one priority area, both in the infrastructure development, that is port construction, as well as in terms of the marine economy, dovetailing into the Indian concept of Sagarmala, where India is also trying to link up with the interior and connect to the logistics from the interior to the outside, so that the export sector could be strengthened. So this is one area, obviously. Secondly, in terms of defense, there are identical views between India and Indonesia. Number one, both do consider that the freedom of navigation is a major issue in that area. The Quad had mentioned this last November, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, and Indonesia has concerns on the Natuna gas field where China is encroaching on those, and recent statement by Indonesia that Natuna gas fields will be protected, etc., would provide for a huge defense related cooperation between the two. Third area is obviously Indonesia, Japan and India initiated the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, and they have given out the vision document on the sustaining growth across the Asia-Africa region. And as architects of this new concept, there is a lot that could go into this in coordinating with the member states in this region, in Asia and Africa,
right,
especially in the maritime domain, and also in terms of the social sector that they are focusing on, and the productive assets that they want to trigger in these regions. So there is a lot that in these three aspects that both are trying to trigger some kind of cooperation. There is also the economic aspect in which the current investment, trade, etc., is very, very low.
Right.
This has a huge potential to grow, especially as both sides are enhancing growth rates. Indonesia, also the country, as PricewaterhouseCoopers has mentioned, is going to grow at 7 to 8% by 2050, and a major economy in itself. And speculations about Indonesia joining the BRICS, and other multilateral institutions as a country in the G20, it has its own, huge potential. So there is a lot that both India and Indonesia can do, even in the economic field.
Right. Fair enough.
So this is
sure. Ambassador, as far as Indonesia is concerned, what is it that India can get out of Indonesia?
Well, I believe it's a much larger question than what India can get out of Indonesia or what Indonesia can get out of India. Certainly, there are many bilateral complementarities. We import a great deal of coal from Indonesia. We've been traditionally a major palm oil importer. In recent years, very large number of Indian tourists have been visiting Indonesia. There are also investment opportunities. But as I said, there is a larger framework and a larger context, and really that is derived from the Look East or Act East policy, also with regard to the strategic and economic partnership between India and ASEAN. And most of all, I think, and this is something new, which Professor Muni had referred to, there's a greater consciousness of the maritime in our foreign policy thinking. And possibly it is this greater urge towards focusing on maritime issues, not simply from a strategic or security related perspective, but as emerging out of the fact that we are a major coastline state and that we have huge stakes in the Indian Ocean. So I would see this visit or these visits as part of that context, and coming so soon after the presence of the ASEAN heads of government and heads of states in Delhi. What this does also suggest is that we are attending much more to the details rather than just focusing on the large summitry or the pageantry associated with large summits. So I see this visit to Indonesia and Singapore as part of that general context. It's significant that the Prime Minister is addressing the Shangri-La dialogue, because really the Shangri-La dialogue has emerged in the last 2 decades as a platform for countries to indicate their priorities and their interests. And I think focusing on our maritime heritage and on our maritime interests, this is a very good forum to do so.
Sure. Professor Muni, what is it that Indonesia will be expecting out of India?
No, I'll tell you both related to your first question of what India can expect out of it. See, these two countries have a very unique relationship. They fought their independence struggle together. And then they diverted to a level where Indonesia even threatened to encircle Andaman and Nicobar in 1965 for the sake of the Pakistanis. I think they are now realizing that we must go back to the earlier period of civilizational contexts, which are very, very old. I think even Prime Minister is going to visit some of those temples there. Now, forgetting those civilizational contexts, why did we come to a level where we had an eyeball to eyeball kind of a situation? This is where the new context, the post-Cold War context, and the idea of Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean being one theater of strategic interest has revived the two sides. And thanks to the new president of Indonesia, that he has taken it up almost as a core of Indonesian foreign policy. Therefore, both of them are sitting at a very critical geostrategic location called Malacca Strait.
Yes.
Which actually allows all the trade to pass through. And if I may just mention that the Chinese are very conscious that this is a kind of a passage which is so critical for them, and it's so critical for all others. Now, if these two countries who are sitting at the face of Malacca Strait and decide to cooperate, and this is where the Sabang port development is absolutely critical, because Sumatra and Andaman and Nicobar are actually the two cornerstones of India and Indonesia, which are looking after Malacca Strait. Now, if they strengthen there, they really can define the terms of strategic and economic engagement. Secondly, there has absolutely been no cooperation economically between Indonesia and India. And it has, in fact, Indonesia was the first country where Indians went to invest. Rama Group and others were very, very powerful there.
Right.
Again, it declined. And now it is time, Indonesians are saying, your economy is growing. Indonesian economy is also growing. It's $1 trillion now, almost 7th in the world in terms of PPP terms. Therefore, if the two economies and two strategically located countries decide to cooperate with each other, they have a lot to gain from this kind of a cooperation.
Sure.
So it's not a one-sided way. And I am glad that the leadership on both these countries have awakened to these prospects and are going to harness both strategically and economically.
So the prospects are
I may also add,
yes.
even socially, the two countries are facing similar challenges. You know, last month, Indonesia has faced several terrorist attacks. And we are so much worried about this terrorism. Now, Indonesia is an Islamic country. We are not an Islamic country, but they are also facing the radicals. And I think this is where the two countries can, even on the social front, can decide how to confront this menace which is threatening both of them.
Indeed. You know, that was the next question that I was going to come to. You know, terror has been a problem in Indonesia, Professor. So do you believe that terrorism is also, or anti-terror operations is going to be on top of the agenda when Prime Minister Modi meets Joko Widodo?
Indeed, counter-terrorism is one of the major, we will see in the joint statements, as the largest Islamic country. Indonesia also faces a lot of issues. Bali blasts were one which threatened to disrupt the tourist flows in Indonesia. So this is one. But I would also suggest the other security problem, that is the piracy. The International Maritime Foundation, Maritime Organization, suggested that the Southeast Asian waters have now spiked a lot of piracy incidents. Nearly half of the global piracy incidents are happening in waters of Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. So I think one of the major thrusts of Prime Minister Modi would be in terms of counter-piracy operations in this area. Already there is the MALSINDO, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. There's a coordination mechanism between these three countries, but they were not able to really tackle the piracy issues. And in 2005, India formally suggested that India will chip in the counter-piracy missions, but not much progress has happened in this sphere. So I guess there is, with the Andaman Nicobar being beefed up in the recent years, we will probably see more in the maritime counter-piracy operations with Indonesia as well as with Singapore and Malaysia.
Sure. Sure. Talking about Singapore, Ambassador, what are the areas of cooperation and what do you think our focus areas should be during Prime Minister's visit to Singapore?
Well, with Singapore and India, we have a multifaceted relationship. It's driven by a great deal of commonalities in the sphere of investment, and Singapore, despite its small size, being a major financial center in Asia, is one of the larger contributions in India. There are, apart from the financial aspects, there are other areas where there is a great deal of gainful cooperation, and I refer in particular to areas such as skills training, water treatment, emerging urbanization issues, the kind of opportunities which are available now in India on account of the Mumbai-Delhi freight corridor. All of this is of great interest to investors in Singapore. The recent improvement in India in the ease of doing business index is also something which helps a great deal when we look at Singapore investments coming into India. On the economic side, there are new areas which we have to also focus on, which is in terms of how can we harness both Singapore and India, how can we harness joint investment opportunities, and in this regard investments in places such as Myanmar or Indonesia, both of which are important for us and also important for Singapore. These throw up various new opportunities.
Right. Professor, as far as Singapore is concerned, how do we have a great relationship with Singapore. How do we take it to the next level?
Well, I think next level is firstly we are expanding in defense, and Ambassador Raghavan knows much better. There are problems in economic side also. In terms of investment and trade, yes, I think Singapore is the best partner of India in whole of ASEAN in terms of economic matters. But there are the movement has somehow been slowed down, and this is being realized. The defense cooperation has to be upgraded now. We started it almost in 2007, I suppose. Correct me if I am wrong. And have built upon it. Singapore is the only country which has a territory within India for its own defense purposes. This kind of a relationship India has with no other country, and Singapore has obviously with no other country. Therefore, defense will be strengthened. Again, we have some nuances of differences on how to handle counter-terrorism, but Singaporeans are very, very acutely conscious of the terrorism threat which is there. We have started cooperating with each other in exchange of information and various other coordinations regarding counter-terrorism measures, which also needs to be strengthened. But I would say the Singapore relationship is on a stable track. You can increase the speed, but the direction and the track is absolutely clear, which is not the case so far as Indonesia is concerned, where we have just begun and we have not been able to. So, in a way, comparatively, Singapore is an easier side of it. Secondly, Singapore has been greatly helpful in helping India consolidate its position and its integration with the whole region, ASEAN in particular, but I would say with the whole region. So, I think we must continue to reinforce our relationship with Singapore, both economically and strategically. Politically, there are not serious problems. In fact, we can learn from Singapore where they have managed their ethnic diversity internally. There is great deal to learn, but let us see. I hope that this visit will further move the relationship forward.
Professor Kondapalli, what are the new areas of cooperation that probably India and Singapore can look at and take forward?
Space is one, which is and IT related. A lot of things are going on, dialogues are going on in these two spheres between India and Singapore. But there are also the increasing pressure for Singapore from China. After the Starlight training program with Taiwan was curbed by the Chinese when they seized the vessels in Hong Kong, there is a lot of concern in Singapore about the China factor. I think there will be some kind of a balancing that Singapore will emerge, will propose for India, as Goh Chok Tong previously did, by comparing China and India as two sides of the Airbus, two wings of the Airbus. So that kind of balancing could probably happen. But specific areas are in terms of defense, as Professor Muni mentioned. There is the space cooperation, which is quite possible during this visit. Maritime related, it's not far away from Andaman Nicobar Joint Command, especially in terms of the anti-submarine activity that both countries would like to promote. So this is one area where I would see substantial progress. They do have the surveillance planes, as the Indian Navy has similar ones bought from the United States. So we would probably see more of anti-submarine activity between the two countries.
Sure. And Ambassador, as far as Singapore is concerned, are there any specific areas that you would like to see importance being thrown by both the leaders? Do you think areas that have been neglected in the past?
Well, one very positive thing in our relationship with Singapore is that it covers such a broad spectrum, from the economy to tourism to defense to financial investments and so on. In the past 7-8 years, the idea has been to focus on specific doables, for instance in skills training, or in setting up industrial estates, or in urban planning and so on, because these are practical takeaways and can show results in a finite period of time, even when larger complementarities exist and are worked upon for the longer time frame. The area where I think there is a great deal of potential still, which is yet to be fully harnessed, or the potential in fact keeps growing, is in the area of civil aviation, where because of the expansion of our own private sector airlines and their desire to move outside to other territories outside India, similarly the opening up of the Indian civil aviation market, number of new airports coming up, new international airports coming into operation. This is something which is of great interest to Singapore, because one of their fundamental beliefs is that if you improve connectivity, everything else will follow automatically. So I would not be surprised if we see some push in the civil aviation sector during this visit, also quite apart from other areas which are also important, and where there are important and good important takeaways and doables.
Okay, time now for closing comments from all my guests, starting with Professor Muni. Let's look at the region on the whole, and not just Indonesia and Singapore. Professor, how important a region is Southeast Asia for India?
Fair enough, but just a small footnote on Singapore. I forgot to flag the issue that we had started even in terms of transfer of defense technologies and joint production, which faced some bottlenecks later on. I hope that this visit would smoothen that up, and perhaps in that sector also we will be going ahead. As I mentioned, so far as region is concerned, it is very important. That's why Prime Minister Modi changed the name from Look East to Act East, by showing that we are far more committed, and wherever we had failed to deliver, we will try and deliver. I think this is a time when India must deliver on the promises. It is trying its best, like the trilateral highway or the whole region so far as is concerned. And this is also a very critical step forward in the consolidation of the Indo Pacific concept, because which is still under a lot of debate, both in the region as also within India. So I find these two countries with a great deal of emphasis on defense and economic cooperation. These are the two areas where both are being emphasized. The Indo Pacific concept would get a boost, and India's role would be very well defined as to what we are going to do in the coming years and decades.
Sure. You know, Professor Kondapalli, you spoke about the Quad earlier in the program. As far as the Quad is concerned, can we see the Quad +1 anytime soon, maybe involving Indonesia as well?
Well, the weakness of the Quad is it doesn't have an institutional mechanism or any ASEAN country as a member of this. If the Quad is looking after the freedom of navigation and rule of law and open and international system, maritime security and connectivity in Southeast Asia, then it doesn't have a country which, a local country in ASEAN, which could propose, which could provide for sustenance to the Quad. To that extent, I think there are Singapore, Indonesia, very important, but also Vietnam, which could provide for that kind of sustenance for the Quad. Given the vagaries of the Trump administration since November last year, and the direction of the Quad not really taking much stock in the maritime domain or in the other aspects of the Quad, I think India is trying to approach countries in the region, seek their support, because one of the weaknesses that India has is it cannot sustain operations, naval operations, without the support of a local country, either Vietnam or Singapore or Indonesia or Malaysia or whichever country it is.
Right.
So to that extent, I think the visit is important in terms of proposing some building blocks of that Quad.
Right. Ambassador, just taking the point that Professor Kondapalli made forward, as the world is becoming more and more protectionist, is this region going to be the next region to focus on?
Well, for us, Southeast Asia has always been a region we have to focus on, and certainly for the last 25 years, in one way or the other, that has been the effort. Where Southeast Asia is concerned, one principle which we have to constantly keep in mind, particularly because the Prime Minister is going to Indonesia and also to Singapore, is this idea of centrality of ASEAN, which is something which is deeply ingrained in the strategic mindset of all the ASEAN countries. So even when we are looking at wider horizons, and in particular the larger Indian Ocean, the Indo Pacific, the centrality of ASEAN is something which we have to constantly keep in mind, because anything which erodes that also carries the risk of upsetting the very good relationship which we have developed with the ASEAN countries, both individually and also collectively.
Right. All right. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Well, you can share your feedback and suggestions as well. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha Television. That's it from me. See you again next time.